So good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's Lunch and Learn. My name is Alicia Wimbush, and I serve as the Program Director for Religious Leaders at the Institute for Islamic Christian and Jewish Studies. As you come in again, I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat box by sharing your name, your organization, and where you are Zooming in from. I know we have people from across the nation, so we want to see where you all are coming from. If you are new to ICJS and our Lunch and Learn gatherings, I would like to share a little bit about our organization. ICJS is an independent educational nonprofit that envisions an interreligious society in which dialogue replaces division, friendship overcomes fear, and education eradicates ignorance. And in order to cultivate such a society, ICJS seeks to develop and support interreligious leaderships within schools, congregations, nonprofits, hospital settings, the academy. And because the work of spiritual care providers is interreligious work, in 2021, ICJS teamed up with the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, which many of you may be aware of, to conduct a research on chaplains in Maryland to see what their needs are and areas of growth. And so in 2022, ICJS launched a chaplaincy initiative in an effort to support the work of chaplains and spiritual care providers. And these lunch and learns are just one of the several programs we offer spiritual care providers, which is actually open to anybody across the state. And I would say even internationally, we do have people joining us across the seas. And so today's Lunch and Learn gathering will focus on how we as spiritual care providers can deepen our capacity for interreligious spiritual care within our organizations. And like I said, a lot of our work is with people that are coming from religious backgrounds different than our own. In the survey that I mentioned before with the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, the participants, the Maryland chaplains reported that 40% of the time they are providing spiritual care to someone who has a different religious background than their own. And so, given the growing religious diversity within our nation, it is important that we continue to expand our capacity to provide spiritual care across religious differences. And we also help our organizations see the importance of recognizing and considering the religious orientations of the people we provide care for. And so today, I just want to share some of the objectives for our time together. It is my hope that we will expand our interreligious competency and fluency and capacity as spiritual care providers. We will discover ways as spiritual care providers to raise awareness of interreligious concerns within our organizations that impact overall care, whether we're in a hospital setting, whether we're serving as police chaplains. It's helpful for our organizations to see what these interreligious concerns are. And then hopefully we'll be able to assess and understand how our organizations view religious differences, how that can actually impact the provision of care, both spiritual and otherwise. And then lastly, I want us to be able to identify several attributes and skills needed to cultivate a culture of interreligious hospitality within our organizations. And so again, of course, we want to look at ourselves as spiritual care providers, how we are developing, but I also want us to kind of have an organizational view, how we're helping our organization see the importance of interreligious spiritual care. So throughout this presentation, I will be inviting you all to reflect and respond to several questions. And so you can feel free to put in the chat box your responses so that we can learn together. I know with Zoom, it's hard to kind of interact, but I'm hoping that some of the questions that I'm going to be asking you all will kind of help you all interact with each other and then just kind of offer some time for you all to reflect. So I want to start off by sharing some descriptions of words I will be using throughout this presentation. And again, some of these words you'll probably have your own definitions for. And so if you do, please feel free to share it in the chat so we can learn from you as well. And so the first term I want to share is that of defining spirituality. And I know, you can define that word in so many different ways, but I'm looking at Pargament and Hill, who are theologians, and they talk about spirituality as a way of relating to the sacred. So any way that we're relating to that which we find sacred can be defined as spirituality. And then Emmanuel Larte, who's a pastoral theologian, he kind of broadens our understanding of this term, and he describes spirituality as an enlivening and integrative force within a person, which involves the relationship to self, others, the world, and the transcendent. So again, he's just not looking at what we see as sacred, but he's looking at our relationships to ourself, to others, the world, and then also to the transcendent. And so then the second term that I want to define is religion. And again, I'm sure there's a lot of different definitions that we have of religion, but I thought these two would be helpful as we are thinking about interreligious spiritual care. Professor Catherine Cornell, she states that religion points to ways in which humans have given expression to their relationship with some transcendent reality. And so religion provides varying answers to many of the same fundamental questions and tries to attend in different ways to some of the same moments of existential crisis. And so, a lot of us as spiritual care providers, we are working with people that might be at the end of life, who might be facing illnesses. And so, how are their religious traditions helping them make meaning of these existential crises? And then another definition by scholars of psychology of religion, Stephen Sandage and Jonathan Morgan, and we're actually going to come back to their work a little bit later in this presentation, but they describe religion as a communal tradition of symbols, beliefs, and practices that encode the world with significance in relation to the sacred. And so I love how they kind of are lifting up that this is a communal tradition. This is traditions that communities have passed on from generation to generation. And again, if you have your own definitions, we would love to hear them. Please go ahead and throw them in the chat so we can learn from each other during this presentation. So, many of you might be aware of the 5B framework. It comes out of the Tri Faith Initiative. And so, oftentimes, as spiritual care providers, we are called upon to do spiritual assessments. And I found this framework to be helpful. And so, the 5B framework, and actually the Tri Faith Initiative, they added two Bs that you might not be aware of. But we're going to be looking at belief, belonging, behaviors, and then the two added components of body and becoming. And so within this framework, there are certain questions that we can ask our care recipients. And so as I go through these questions, I would love for you all to think about your own spiritual identity and your own religious orientation, and how would you answer these questions. So I'm going to go ahead and just go through this 5B framework. So the first one is belief. So what guides you? If you think about your life, when you think about your own values, what would you say guides you? Is there a higher power that guides you? Are there specific values of justice, love, peace that guide you? And so belief, what would you say your belief is? And then the second concept is behavior. What behaviors pattern your life? Do you find yourself in a routine of praying before you get up and start your day? Do you have a routine of meditating? Maybe a pattern that kind of guides your life is walking. I know for me, I definitely consider walking as a spiritual practice. It's a way that I can get in tune with my spirit and get in tune with what is going on with me. So, what behaviors pattern your life? And then the third one is belonging. Who is your community? And so this might be a congregation, it might be a mosque, might be a synagogue that's your community. I know there's been a lot of work on people who are no longer affiliated with a religious tradition. And so their community is a workout group. And so they might find their fitness group is their community. So who is your community? And then the fourth concept, and again, these last two are new that have been added, is body. How is your spirituality intertwined with your physical experience? And so, are there practices? Maybe yoga is a practice that you have that helps you get connected with your own sense of spirituality. Are there certain garments that you wear that express your spirituality? And then the last one is becoming. And I thought this was so important for us to think about. And as spiritual care providers, we're often thinking about our own spiritual journeys. But how is it to ask our care recipients, what is your spiritual journey? Where are you now and where are you going? And so these five concepts, they help us kind of get to what our own spirituality and religion is. And I like this framework because this actually is a framework that can be used by any spiritual caregiver. And these are questions that even if you don't have a particular religious tradition, if you don't necessarily see yourself as spiritual, these are questions that anybody can answer for themselves. And so it's not just for anybody that has a particular religious tradition, but it's anybody that we come in contact with. So hopefully that's a tool that is helpful for you. And so then the last question or the last concept that I would love for you all to consider is this idea of interreligious leadership. The question I would love for you all to entertain is, do I see myself as an interreligious leader? I know some of you on the call, you might consider yourself an interfaith chaplain. And so this might really resonate with you. At the ICJS, we have a working definition of interreligious leadership, and we see it as an ability to do the inner work to appreciate a religious other while also possessing the willingness to question one's own religious presuppositions. And so, really, how are we doing our own work to think through what are my beliefs? What are the assumptions that are shaping my belief? How am I appreciating somebody that has a different religious tradition than my own? And so, a part of interreligious leadership is really kind of doing that inner work. And then the second part of this definition is really one that's very key, particularly to the work that we do. And that's a capacity to connect, inspire, and mobilize others to embrace religious difference and stand against religious bias and prejudice. And so, um, this part of leadership requires us to really think about how are we inspiring those we work with, our organization. Oftentimes, we're either a solo chaplain or we're working in a very small team or spiritual care team. But how is our work actually inspiring those who are working with us in our interdisciplinary teams? And so I would love for you all to think about, how am I, as a spiritual care provider, cultivating a welcoming environment for the people that are in my care, that are coming from different religious traditions? And so I would love for you to think about what images come to your mind when you think about welcoming somebody. And so I would love for you all, again, if you want to share in the chat, what images are invoked when you think about welcoming a person that has a different religious tradition than your own. In the chaplaincy literature, we often find that hospitality is invoked. And I'm sure for many of you, I love that, a sacred duty. I love that, Robin. Hospitality is a sacred duty, openness to learning, seeking to understand. So these are things that as spiritual care providers, we are doing and saying in order to create a hospitable environment for our care recipients. Yes, Nick, being curious and teachable. I love that. Um, so in the chaplaincy literature, we're often talking about hospitality. And as spiritual care providers, we are offering hospitality. And so I wanted to lift up two pastoral theologians who also use this image of hospitality. The first one you all might be familiar with, Robert Dykstra. In the book Images of Pastoral Care, he offers the image of the intimate stranger. And he talks about how, as spiritual care providers, we are often both the host and the stranger when we are offering spiritual care, particularly in times of crisis. And he looks at the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian New Testament, where it talks about that we are obligated to take care and protect the stranger, who often is displaced because of a crisis, whether that's a health crisis, whether it's a loss of job. We are often there to help people as they're navigating these particular crises. And he talks about how, as a stranger, as chaplains, we don't often know who we're going to meet, what the situation is going to be. And so we might have some feelings of uncertainty, fear, hesitancy. And so as a chaplain, we have to deal with those experiences. We have to deal with those feelings. And so I know for me, when I worked at a in a hospital setting, and when I would be on call, I often would get very anxious, especially when I would get calls from the ER because I knew it was some type of tragic event, and I didn't know what I was going to walk into. And so, in those situations, I become that intimate stranger, but I'm also the host. I also have to find a way to connect with either the patient that has come in or the family members that have come in. And so, this is just one image of hospitality. So, I want to share a second image. And this image actually comes from the book you all might be familiar with. It's called Post-Colonial Images of Pastoral Care. And so CPE educator Amani Legagner, she draws on this image of hospitality and she talks about the healing welcomer. I love that. The healing welcomer kind of reminds me of Nowin's The Wounded Healer. And so she says that as chaplains who are healing welcomers, we intend to offer respectful, hospitable presence and accompaniment to those served while endeavoring to facilitate alleviation of pain and suffering. And it's in this relationship, healing is personally defined by the care recipient. So, as chaplains, we're not coming in saying, this is how you're going to be healed, this is what you need to do, but we're really creating that space for the care recipient to find their own path towards healing, whatever that might look like, and draw on their own spiritual and religious resources. And so it's so interesting when we think about the welcome the healing welcomer and the intimate stranger. It's interesting to think about these concepts because this shapes our identity as spiritual care providers. And so I'm wondering, do any of these images resonate with you? Or are there other images that might resonate with you? And so I would love to hear that. Jacqueline, I love you say, yeah, that's us, the welcoming healer. And I love this, Elizabeth. You're talking about it's beyond being a witness. I love that. Um, and so, as a chaplain, how do you cultivate a culture of hospitality within your organization? How do you specifically cultivate a culture of hospitality in your work and your organization? And again, feel free to share in the chat. Some of you already talked about that. Cheryl, I see you said walking alongside another. Again, that's how we cultivate this culture of hospitality. Um, so I can imagine some of you have traveled, whether in the United States or internationally, but through your travels, I'm sure you have experienced hospitality in some way. And so when you are traveling or when you are being a guest in an area that is new to you, there are rituals of hospitality. There are things that people do or things that people ask you to do when you're coming into their home, whether it's removing your hat or removing your shoes. It could be they're giving you a beverage to drink or something to eat. I know when I traveled in India, everywhere we went, we were offered food, and it was actually considered rude not to eat the food. And so every organization, every family, every culture has some type of rituals of hospitality. And I would say that is the same for our organizations. Our organizations have rituals of hospitality. Sometimes we don't see that as rituals of hospitality, but they are. And so I would love for you all to think about what are the rituals of hospitality in your organization? And I would like to suggest that in order for us to begin to cultivate a culture of hospitality within our organizations, there are three things that we really need to be aware of. And so I would love to just kind of go through those things and just think about these questions for yourself. Um, so the first one is we have to be aware of our own presence as a spiritual care provider. We must ask ourselves, what is my religious identity and orientation, and how is that actually shaping how I'm viewing somebody who has a different religious tradition? And how is that impacting the care that I provide? I know for me personally, I grew up in a very conservative Baptist tradition. But as I went through my chaplaincy training, I was introduced to so many people from so many different walks of life. And so prior to those experiences, I would have felt like, okay, I need to share with them about the gospel. I need to share with them about my faith. But as I began to do my own training, I realized it's not so much about having somebody believe like you believe, but it's about hearing how they are making meaning of their life and their situation. And so I would say, as a chaplain in training, my conservative Baptist tradition really shaped how I viewed people. But as I continued to experience people from different religious traditions, my theology began to open up. I began to see truly the imago Dei in everybody and recognize that everybody has a way of making meaning of their life. Not one is better, not one is superior, but it's just different. And so I was able to be transformed in the process of working as a spiritual care provider and meeting people from different walks of life. And so the second thing I would say we need to be aware of course, is our care recipient. What is their religious identity? And how is it shaping their experience? Being whether it's being in the hospital or being a student in a college setting, if they're going through crisis, how is their own spiritual tradition shaping how they're receiving care and how they desire care? I know for me, as a chaplain, specifically in a hospital setting, there would be times where I would go into somebody's room and they saw chaplain on my name tag, and they were like, "Oh no, like you're going to give me bad news." And so they had an understanding of what a chaplain was based upon their own experiences, maybe based upon their own spiritual journeys. And so we have to be aware of our care recipients, what their religious traditions are, and how it's shaping how they're experiencing, the moment that we encounter them. And then the third thing that I believe we have to be aware of, again, going back to our own organizations, what are the norms and rituals of hospitality within the organization that might impact the care and the care recipient? And so, oftentimes, we might be in organizations that, religion, they feel like it doesn't have any bearing on the care. But if that's the view of the organization, how does that impact when a care recipient comes and religion is very important to them? And so we have to think about what are our organization's rituals of hospitality? When a person comes into the hospital, are they asked about dietary accommodations? Are they asked about their religion? Are they asked about, what their preferences are? And so, again, these are all things that we do in order to create an environment where people feel seen and heard. I'm just checking the chat. I'm seeing some wonderful examples of people offering care. I love this. Panthea, she talks about understanding religious traditions related to prayer, blessings, and sacred rituals is essential. Some cultures appreciate prayer or scripture reading as an act of hospitality, while others may prefer silent presence and emotional support. That is wonderful. You are so correct on that, and you're already kind of going into part of my presentation where I talk about that, how everybody connects with their spirituality in so many different ways. And as chaplains, it's a part of our responsibility to really see how people are connecting with their spirituality. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Um, Again, these are questions that I want you all to think about. So in my study in interreligious spiritual care, I actually found a tool that I think might be helpful, and you all might have different tools that you use. But this is a tool to assess the interreligious competency or fluencies of ourselves, of our spiritual care teams, and also our organizations. And so hopefully you find it helpful as well. And so this model is actually based upon an intercultural development model. And Jonathan Morgan and Stephen Sandage, who I talked about earlier in the presentation, they actually created this tool that will help us think about where are we in our interreligious journey. And so I'm going to go through the 6 stages in this model, and you'll notice on this diagram, I actually kind of put together 2 stages, but I'll explain the stages. But as I'm going through them, what I invite you to do, and again, you can reflect on this in the chat. I would love for you to think about, where am I on this spectrum? I want you to think about, where was I? Maybe 5 years ago, or when I first started chaplaincy training, where was I and where am I at now? And then I also want you to think about, where's my organization? How are they relating to people of different religious traditions? And so again, as I go through this spectrum, I want you to think about where you are and then where your organization is. And again, feel free to share in the chat any reflections that you have. So the very first stage is denial. And so in this stage, a person might have difficulty acknowledging religious differences beneath those that are apparent, and they might generally avoid or dismiss religious others. And so how that might look in an organization, religion is often seen as a non-factor in the care or service provided outside of maybe the spiritual care department. Religion is not talked about, it's avoided. It might even be seen as taboo. And so that's that first stage. And then the second stage is polarization. And so in this stage, individuals construe religious differences through rigid either or categories based on superiority or inferiority. And then what this might look like in an organization. The organization, they might have a particular religious orientation, but what they do is they see their particular religious orientation as the standard and the norm by which all services and care should be provided and adhered to, because they see their religious orientation as superior. There might be a concerted effort to change the care recipient's belief systems and behaviors based upon their particular religious tradition. Or they might try to create an environment where the care recipient's religious orientation is seen as inferior or inadequate. And so this is that polarizing, the either or categories. And then that third stage, minimization. In this stage, a person subsumes other categories into familiar religious ideas. For example, somebody might say, all religions are saying the same thing. But this emphasis on similarity often obscures recognition of important religious differences. And so, yes, there might be some common themes, and there might be some common values, but there are differences within our religious traditions, and so we don't want to minimize those differences. So what might this look like in an organization? The organization may not have a particular religious orientation. However, they see all religions as the same. So they do not take time to understand the particularities of a person's religious orientation or how this might impact the care that is given or the care, how the care is received. And so that would be under minimization. And then acceptance. Through increased cognitive complexity and emotional flexibility, a person in this stage is able to recognize and appreciate religious differences while remaining self-aware of one's own religious preferences and perspectives. And I would have to say, I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but going through clinical pastoral education really helps you to be self-aware of your own preferences and perspectives, and then it also helps you to begin to appreciate others who have different religious orientations. And so in an organization where they are accepting of religious differences, again, they may or may not have a particular religious orientation. However, they are intentional about recognizing and celebrating religious differences throughout the organization. They find ways to meet the religious needs and preferences of both their staff and their care recipients. And so this is what that acceptance stage looks like. Curtis, thank you so much. I appreciate what you're saying. He said, when people say all religions are the same, it can be a way of someone saying you're wrong, but you'll get it like me one day. Oh, wow. That is very profound. You're right. Oftentimes we make these statements, but what are the assumptions underneath the statement? So thank you, Curtis, for lifting that up for us. So in this stage of adaptation, in this stage, individuals have the capacity to act in respectful and appropriate ways across religious differences. And they're able to see another person's perspective, but they're also able, in the literature, it talks about code switching. So they're able to adopt some of the religious practices of their care recipients in order to meet their needs. And so that is adaptation. And in this last stage, integration, in this stage, a person is living out their commitments to interreligious relationships in healthy ways amidst the stress and marginality that often comes with those commitments. And it's interesting this last phase that the developers of this talk about how oftentimes when we're in this integration phase, it can make us feel marginalized within our own religious traditions because people might feel like, hey, our way is the right way. How are you open to all these other religious traditions? And so sometimes that might make us feel like an outsider, even within our communities. But again, we're living out this commitment to openness and being able to provide that hospitable space for people to receive care. And so, in these last two stages of adaptation and integration, what that might look like for an organization is you can truly see that this organization has cultivated a culture of interreligious hospitality. You can see it in their policies, you can see it in their staffing, in their leadership structure. When they're planning events, you can see that they're very intentional to make sure that people from diverse perspectives are at the table doing their planning, even in their mission as an organization. And so, again, as you look at these stages, and I'm sorry, it's kind of small, the print might be small, so I can always share this with you, a bigger version so you can really look at it. I would love for you to think about this. And again, put this in the chat if you feel comfortable. Where would you say you are currently on this spectrum? Where would you say you are currently on this spectrum? And then once you kind of have a sense of where you think you are, um, where do you think your organization is? Where is your organization? And you might find that maybe there's a disconnect. And so, if there is a disconnect, how can you, as a spiritual care provider, maybe develop spaces for your organization to become more accepting, to kind of take the step of recognizing that religion does matter in the care of our care recipients? Monica, this was developed by Jonathan Sandage and let me make sure I get the names correct. I will make sure to put them in the chat for you. But no, I did not develop this. This was actually developed by two psychologists that came up with this. But I'll put the names in the chat for you. So yeah, thank you all so much for sharing where you are at. Oh, I see a picture here. Somebody shared a picture. Yes, Thaddeus. Oh my goodness. We're actually going to hear from Dr. Siegel soon, but he's showing a picture of his office that is very interreligiously welcoming. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. This is great. Oh, this is great. Thank you. So yeah, so it's helpful for us to think about where we are, and then where our organization is, and then what we could do to continue to cultivate that hospitality. So I'm going to move on, and I want us to think about what are some skills, what are some attributes that we as care recipients can be developing as we're moving on in our own spiritual journeys and becoming more interreligiously aware and hospitable, but then things also that we can model for our organizations, especially if we're finding that, we're in spaces that don't necessarily view religion as important in their work. Um, Nicholas, thank you for sharing that. I just want to lift this up. He says, serving in military forces helped me to move from acceptance to integration and be sensitive and open to other individuals' practice. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So many of you that talked about being in the acceptance phase, integration phase, the skills that I'm going to lift up, you probably are already doing them. And there's probably other things that you're doing that I might not get to. But if there is, please put in the chat box what other skills and attributes have you found helpful as you're providing care across religious differences. So in this developmental model, they talk about certain skills, certain attributes that are helpful as we're thinking about cultivating interreligious hospitality. And so the first one is frame shifting, which I know we're all aware of, taking the perspective of another person. And of course, we know that this requires empathy, it requires curiosity, a sense of interconnection. It also requires religious humility. We have to take a step back and say, you know what? I can learn from somebody else who is of a different religious tradition. And I often say that frame shifting actually invites us to be a student of the care recipient. So instead of going into a room, whether you're in a hospital setting or if you're on a college campus, or if you're in the military, instead of going in and saying, okay, I know all about your religious tradition, no, we become the student of the care recipient. We learn from them about what they need, what they believe, what their values are, and how their religious orientation is shaping the experience they are having or how they're coping. Um, so yes, so we have to be a student as well. Um, and then the second skill that's lifted up in this developmental model is code switching. And you all may have heard this framing. Oftentimes it's kind of given a negative connotation, code switching. But in this framework, the code switching is about respectfully and consciously adapting one's behavior to the religious needs of the care recipient. And so if there is a practice that might not be in your practice, but is very important to the care recipient, are you able to maybe perform that? And again, there might be some rituals that they need a person, particularly within their religious tradition, to actually facilitate. But if that's not the case, are you able to provide that spiritual resource for them? And if you're not, maybe there's practices that you're not comfortable with, and you have to know where you draw the line. In that case, we have to facilitate an environment where the care recipient can carry out a ritual or a practice that is meaningful to them. Or we might have to be able to connect them with somebody that can maybe facilitate a ritual that is important to them in their time of need. And I would say that facilitating definitely requires us to be bridge builders as spiritual care providers, being able to connect the care seeker not only with their spiritual resources, but also connect them with maybe some religious leaders within the community that can provide spiritual support to the care recipient if we can't do that ourselves. And so, as spiritual care providers, I believe it's so important for us not only just to kind of do the work in our organization, but we also need to be doing that bridge building work within our communities. So if there is a need that arises that we cannot meet, we can always have somebody to go to. And so I would love for you all to reflect on which of these skills have you utilized, and what other skills have you found helpful? Again, please put that in the chat. Yes, Dr. Siegel says cultural humility. I love that. Awe, wonder, curiosity. Beautiful. Monica said, "Yep, I've used all of them." And again, as we're doing this work, these are things that we know to do. But again, I want us to think about how can we help our colleagues, people in our interdisciplinary team, how can we help them also use these skills in their work? So I want to go back to this skill of building bridges, bridge building. I found this framework to be helpful. Thinking about circles of care, circles of care. In the book Encounters for Change, you all might be familiar with it, Interreligious Cooperation in the Care of Individuals and Communities. And this book is by Dagmar Grief. She builds upon this strategy of bridge building by envisioning concentric circles of care. Once we have assessed a care recipient's religious orientation, we can think about, okay, what are some common human experiences that I can connect with this care recipient? Again, whether it's loss, suffering, um, facing death. These are all common human experiences that we can have conversations with our care recipients with. There might be some interconnected spiritual practices. Somebody already in the chat talked about maybe, me and the care recipient, we can share a prayer together or a meditation together. And so if that's meaningful for the care recipient and also something that we can provide, that's a way that we can connect with our care recipient. And then as we get into the center of the circle, there might be particular spiritual practices that the care recipient has that maybe we aren't necessarily able to facilitate. And maybe in that instance, we can connect them with somebody in the community that might be able to provide a certain ritual that's important to them. And then at the very center of this concentric circle are unique spiritual practices. And so, as we all know, as we've done this work, there might be people that profess a certain religious tradition or spirituality. And so, there might be some shared practices, but there might be things that are very unique to the individual themselves. There might be things that they do that's outside of a particular religious tradition that they have found very helpful. And so, I just want to share very briefly when I worked at a long-term care facility, there was a gentleman. He was probably about 89. He was a veteran. He was in the he was in the Air Force. He was in the Air Force, and he often talked about his time in the military, and he talked about war times. And I often noticed that he would kind of talk about the facts. He would recount the history, but he never really kind of delved into his feelings. And so I remember talking to my advisor at this point, and she asked, what that he likes to talk about his time in the Air Force, in the military. And then I also learned that he actually liked to do put together model planes. And so what I decided to do is bring a model plane that we can work on together. And what I found was as we were working on this model plane together, he began to access his feelings in a way that he couldn't just kind of just sharing about his experiences. And so this was a very unique practice for him, putting these models together, and it allowed us to connect on more of a feeling level. And he was able to share some of the grief and the anguish that he experienced being in war and thinking about maybe the people that may have died. And so again, as we are working in our organizations, it's so important. We often talk about person-centered care, and so it's so important that even when we have assessed a person's, what their spirituality is, just recognizing that we're all very unique as well. And so how can we kind of tap into those unique spiritual practices to connect with care recipients? And again, how can we model this for our organization? So, um, and I want to go back to this 5B framework. Again, we can use those questions to also tailor our spiritual care intervention so that people are feeling welcomed and they're feeling seen, not only by us as spiritual care providers, because I think we do an amazing job at that, but how are our colleagues, the interdisciplinary team, how are they also helping us to create this type of environment? Um, Yes, I will make sure to share these slides with you all and make sure you get all the references and resources. So I would love for you all. I'm gonna do a Slido. Hopefully, you all are able to get into it, but I would love to hear from you all. And I want you to think about how might the development of these skills that I just talked about, frame shifting, code switching, bridge building, facilitating, how might the development of these skills be useful to help your organization as a whole cultivate interreligious hospitality? And what are some other skills needed? And so if you would go to the slido.com, the link is in the chat. And just share with your responses, and I'll just highlight a couple of them as I see them come through. So again, you can go to the link that's in the chat, or if you have your phone, you can go to the QR code. I see people, they're typing their responses. Perfect. Hopefully, once they come up, I'll read some of them. But yeah, I want you to think about, what are some of the other skills that are needed, again, to really cultivate this organizational interreligious hospitality. All right. All right. Hopefully, it will come up shortly. Yes. So somebody said, as a novice chaplain, I believe explicit teaching on these four are needed. That would ensure that we understand and are able to embody them in care situations. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Um, yes, being open, curious about religions and other cultures. So as spiritual care providers, like being curious ourselves. Um, so I think the developmental progression would help us think through as an institution how to live up to our aspirations and would help our students understand where they are and some of their experiences. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. Um, it would help to reframe the purpose and meaning of chaplaincy and not assume you're there to deliver bad news. Yes. Rather, they would assume you're there to provide specific spiritual care to them, not proselytizing. Yes, that is so important. I know in our research that we do with Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, and even just in my conversation with people, there was that question. People don't necessarily understand what chaplains do. They do think, oh my gosh, the chaplain is coming to tell me bad news, or the chaplain is trying to, get me to change my religion or something. And so, yes, we definitely need to reframe the purpose and meaning of chaplaincy. These are great, wonderful. Keep them coming, keep them coming. The next thing I'm going to ask you all to think about, I'll go to the next question. And again, if you're in Slido, you should just be able to respond to it. But I would love to have you all think about how can we as spiritual care providers connect, inspire, and mobilize other staff within our organizations to embrace religious differences in order to better meet the religious and spiritual needs of our care recipients. So again, I want you to think about, that second part of that interreligious definition. How can we begin to connect, inspire, and mobilize other staff within our organizations to embrace religious differences? Yes, model the way. That's always the best way. Do it ourselves. Um, yes, spiritual care assessment tools. So not only the spiritual care team has assessments, but other people on our team have the assessment. At the hospital where I work, we engage in a chat with the chaplain. The education is needed not just for patients, but for staff as well. That's wonderful. Yeah, so having some educational opportunities for staff is very important. Very important. And again, somebody said model, model, model. We have to model this. Demonstrate our support for interreligious experiences through modeling and being a resources as a change agent. These are great. Thank you all so much. I appreciate that. So again, keep your answers coming in. um, I am so grateful for all of you joining this session. I hope that you all received something. Again, I know as spiritual care providers, we are already doing a lot of these things, but I wanted us to kind of think about organizationally, how can we bring these skills that we have trained and modeled, how can we bring that to our organization so that we are providing hospitable spaces for people to heal and grow and transition. So thank you again. So I'm going to actually shift gears. And like I said, ICJS, we are excited and we are just glad to be able to provide support to spiritual care providers. And I just want to share an opportunity with chaplains, specifically in the Maryland area, Baltimore area. Well, actually, not just Baltimore, but the Maryland area. We have a grant that we are actually accepting applications for. And this grant, it's a small grant, but it's helping organizations to really build out their capacity for this interreligious spiritual care. And so some of the requirements of this grant is organizations in Maryland that have no more than 3 paid chaplains on staff, or most of their staff are volunteer chaplains. And this grant can be used to get materials for your spiritual care team or for the interdisciplinary team. This can be used to do some education for staff. And then the application for this grant is due February 28th. But I want to bring on Dr. Siegel, who was he was a recipient last year. Last year was the first time that we did this grant. I want to bring him on so that he can share how he used the grant and just kind of give us some insight about how he has been able to really help his organization see the interreligious needs of their care recipients.
So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. I guess it depends on where you are. My name is Thaddeus. I coordinate a spiritual care program in Maryland for a two-hospital system. I have been a director chaplain for 15 years, still a nurse, 34 years, and was a paramedic city of New York before that. So a lot of healthcare experience. So we took advantage. I think we were in the first group that received grants, and we took advantage of the opportunity to file an application. And it was a real easy, ICJS made it very, very easy for us to be able to go through the process. But just to give you an idea, so what I looked at was what could I obtain through the grant that I typically can't obtain through my typical donation resources and things like that. So I tried to figure out what could I, how to use this in a very, very efficient way. So you should be able to see a picture of some prayer rugs, a coexist flag. Again, yes, sending that message out to our community here about the coexistence of interreligious experiences. To the right were interfaith books. They're a specific book that we have been using here that includes both knowledge and prayers. It's really easy for a chaplain to carry around in a Bible case. Some candles, beads from the Islamic and the Buddhist tradition. I can get the Catholic beads, so I didn't worry about those. And then you see some different types of prayer rugs for the Islamic community. And in this picture, the various types of Bibles we used. We bought some Jewish pallets. We bought the ram's horn so we could blow shofar here. And when we have very few opportunities for Jewish support in our hospital, we bought some tefillin as well, so that in the event, because we're so close to the I-95 corridor, and we've had Orthodox Jewish men end up in our hospital, car accidents, heart attacks as they're passing through. So we put a kit together with a sitter as well that enables us then to provide, should somebody be here on the Sabbath, to be able to provide everything they would need to continue their religious observances. Down towards the corner and the bottom, you'll see some Hindu posters. We have found that Hindus love visual imagery on their wall in their room. So we've bought posters. In the middle is sand, so that those within the Islamic tradition that want to practice wudu and are not able to do it in the traditional way with water, we have sand and we get a bucket and we put sand on the bottom, and then there's a ritual that they can follow. So we really try to take advantage of things that we couldn't typically purchase in our budget or obtain through donations and other grants. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm going to stop sharing. But it was very helpful. We've given out most of those materials. I'm trying to think when did we do the grant? Yeah, it was a year ago, November. So
Mhm.
we're 14 months into that period, almost 15 months into that period. And pretty much almost everything we've been able to distribute. With a few exceptions, the Orthodox kits are still here. That's a really rare need. The idea behind this was to anticipate the need so that
Mhm.
if I was asked, I'd be able to respond very quickly, or another chaplain would be able to respond very quickly with something needed either for study or for ritual. So yeah, so it's great. So we're blessed. We've had a great relationship. I had a relationship with the organization before we got the grant. And as you saw today, of the quality of the presentations, and thank you, Alicia, because those two resources I was unfamiliar with both of them. So I
Okay,
really appreciate that. I'm going to see how I can integrate them into our CPE program here as
wonderful.
additional tools for people to be thinking about how to engage with folks that want chaplain engagement. So thank you for that. So I encourage all of you to just stay in touch, take advantage of everything that ICJS is offering you. It's just been an awesome experience for us. We've grown and we've learned and we've stretched from our relationship with them.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Siegel. Oh my goodness. And he actually put a picture of his office. You probably saw it in the chat.
Hey,
But
can I comment about the office?
please, yes.
So we have on the either on my shelf, if you look in the picture on the wall, what I hope to be a representation of every religious, cultural encounter we might have in our hospital system, staff, visitors, patients. I've had a couple of staff come in and say, you don't have something that represents me. So, for example, let me take myself off blurring here. Just give me a second to go back to non-blurring video. Don't blur my background. Okay, good. So you can see this.
Yeah.
So this is the pagan wand given to me by a pagan priest.
Mm.
He had come in my office and he said, I don't have anything that represents me. I said, well, what do you have to offer? He said, oh, you won't receive it. Now he knows the transparency here. I'm a devout Christian. I'm in the renewal charismatic movement. That's all wonderful. That's the way the Holy speaks to me. Um, so he brought this in, and I immediately took two little clips that I had with the adhesives on the back, and I put it on the wall, and it sits very prominently with our Buddhist flags and our Islamic, Catholic, and Buddhist beads and everything on the wall. So when people discover there isn't something in here, they typically volunteer to contribute. So it's been a great way for the community here at the hospital to also engage in coming in the office and just admiring the diversity that they see.
That is wonderful. And one thing that I love that you said is you anticipate the need. You're not just saying, okay, when the need arrives, we'll figure it out. You're already thinking, okay, who might come into, our setting? Let's prepare for them. And so I think that's the epitome of being hospitable. You're already and if you don't have something, you're open to that. So thank you.
Yeah,
I
thank
love that. I absolutely love that. I told Dr. Siegel when I come back to Maryland, I have to come visit him and just look at everything in his office. But it's so beautiful, so beautiful. Thank you so much.
you.
So again, I want to thank you all for coming to today's Lunch and Learn. Again, I hope that something that was shared, you can take back to your organization, to something that you can continue to think about. Before we leave, I would love to encourage you all, if you are not already subscribed to ICJS, please subscribe so that you can get all the information about upcoming programming. You can get information about, if you are in Maryland, you can get information about the grant that we are accepting applications for. And then we will provide the resources that we talked about today in the presentation, and make sure that you get all those resources. Well, we hope to see you again. Have a wonderful day and take care.